On the maiden voyage of the world's grandest ship, amidst all the luxury and glamour, a shadow of death is looming. One passenger is convinced he will be murdered, and he believes the killer is on board, hiding in plain sight. Can Sherlock Holmes unmask the culprit hidden within this floating palace before it's too late? Welcome to the Detective Files, where logic meets mystery. And no case stays closed for long. The SS Olympian was called a floating palace, but on the second night of its maiden voyage, it felt more like a gilded cage. A thick, damp fog had rolled in off the Atlantic, pressing against the grand porthole windows of the first-class lounge like a shroud. I confess, the sheer luxury of the ship, the scent of new lacquer and sea salt, the low, steady hum of the engines beneath our feet, did little to calm the sense of unease that had brought us here. My friend Sherlock Holmes seemed immune to it all. He stood by the railing on the promenade deck, his sharp profile silhouetted against the swirling grey mist, the glow of his pipe, a single point of warmth in the damp chill. We were not here for pleasure. We were here because a telegram, delivered with frantic urgency just before we were set to sail from Southampton, had spoken of a matter of life and death. Our client was Lord Harrington, the world-renowned explorer. When we were shown to his private suite, I was struck by the contrast. The room was the pinnacle of modern luxury, with polished mahogany walls and deep velvet armchairs. But the man himself, famed for his iron nerve in the jungles of Peru, was a wreck. His face was pale, his hands trembled as he poured us both a brandy, and his eyes darted towards the shadows in the corners of the opulent room. "It is not the curse, Mr. Holmes," he began, his voice a strained whisper. "The papers are full of it. The cursed idol of the Incas. Nonsense to sell copies, but it provides a convenient cover for something far more real, far more human." He gestured a shaky hand towards a pedestal in the corner. On it sat a squat, ugly stone idol, a grotesque carving of a forgotten god with chips of obsidian for eyes that seemed to soak up the lamplight. It was a menacing object, to be sure, but Holmes merely glanced at it, his attention fixed on the man. "You believe someone intends to murder you before we reach New York," Holmes stated. "Not as a question, but as a simple fact. I know it," Harrington rasped. He walked over to the marble mantelpiece above an electric fireplace that glowed with a synthetic, cheerless light. "They have already sent their calling card," he pointed. Sitting on the mantelpiece was a small, handsome travel clock in a brass casing. It was utterly silent. Its hands were stopped, frozen at 10 minutes to 5. "This clock was working perfectly this morning," Harrington said, his voice cracking. "I found it like this an hour ago. 4:50. It is a message, Mr. Holmes. It is the exact time my colleague, Mr. Abernathy, died during our last expedition in the Andes. They called it a fall. I call it a prelude." The silence that followed Lord Harrington's declaration was heavier than the fog outside. It was a silence filled with the ghost of a dead man and the promise of another. While I felt a cold dread creep up my spine, Holmes seemed to come alive. The languor that had settled upon him on the deck vanished, replaced by an electric stillness, the quiet alertness of a fox that has caught a scent on the wind. He stepped forward, his movements economical and precise. He did not offer words of comfort. Instead, he reached for the brass clock on the mantelpiece, his long, slender fingers handling it with the care of a surgeon. "May I?" he asked. "A mere formality." He turned the clock over in his hands, his eyes scanning every inch of its surface. "A fine piece. Swiss-made, but not, I think, an antique." "It was a gift," Harrington stammered, watching Holmes as if his life depended on my friend's next observation from my late wife. "And the door to your suite?" Holmes asked, his gaze flicking towards the entrance. "It was locked, I presume." "Of course. Locked from the inside, and the steward has my express orders not to enter without being summoned. No one could have come in." Quote, "While I saw a man on the verge of collapse, Holmes saw only a problem to be dissected." He set the clock down gently and began to pace the length of the cabin, his hands clasped behind his back. The rhythmic creak of the floorboards under his feet was the only sound, save for the muffled, distant strains of the ship's orchestra playing a waltz. It was a grotesque counterpoint to the fear trapped in the room. "Tell me of Abernathy," Holmes said, stopping to peer out of the thick glass of the porthole into the impenetrable grey. You called him a colleague. Was he also a rival? Lord Harrington hesitated, swirling the brandy in his glass. In our profession, Mr. Holmes, the two are often inseparable. We sought the same artifacts, the same renown. Abernathy was ambitious. He took risks. The official report said he lost his footing on a narrow mountain pass near Machu Picchu. It was dusk. 450 Holmes turned back from the window, his expression unreadable in the soft lamplight. And were you the one to find him a flash of something? Was it pain, or something else? Crossed Harrington's face before he masked it. I was. I was the last to see him alive, and the first to see him dead. Quote. My friend nodded slowly, absorbing this. He walked to the main cabin door, a heavy thing of solid oak and polished brass. He ran a finger along the edge, examined the lock, and then the adjoining door that connected to an empty adjoining suite. He found it locked as well. Everything was secure. Everything was sealed. And that, I knew, is what worried him the most. Fear is a potent poison, Watson, Holmes murmured as we left Lord Harrington's suite, but it also makes a man predictable. Let us go and see how our client behaves when he believes he is unobserved. The grand dining hall of the Olympian was a spectacle of light and sound. Crystal chandeliers, vast as constellations, hung from the gilded ceiling, casting a brilliant glow over hundreds of passengers in their evening finery. The air was thick with perfume, the scent of roasted meats, and the ceaseless, cheerful clatter of silver on bone china. It was a world away from the quiet terror in Harrington's cabin. We took a table with a clear view of the lord who sat alone, making a poor show of enjoying his meal. He looked small and old beneath the dazzling lights, a man trying to pretend he was not living on borrowed time. It was then that I saw her. A young woman, dressed in elegant but severe black, rose from a nearby table and approached Lord Harrington. She was perhaps 25, with pale skin, dark hair pulled back tightly, and eyes that held a cold, simmering fire. The murmur of conversation around them seemed to dim as she stopped beside his chair. Lord Harrington, she said, her voice clear and carrying. Though not loud, I was surprised to learn we were to be fellow travelers. One hears you have brought back another great discovery. I do hope it brings you more lasting fortune than your last. Harrington looked up, his face ashen. Miss Vance. I was not aware you were aboard. My uncle, Mr. Abernathy, left me a modest inheritance, she replied, a cruel little smile playing on her lips. Enough for a trip to the New World, to start a new life. He was always so very generous. It is a pity his generosity, and his life, were cut so short on a mountainside. She gave a slight, almost mocking bow, and walked away, leaving a trail of ice in the warm air. The entire exchange lasted less than a minute, but its effect was profound. A dozen pairs of eyes were now fixed on Harrington, whispering behind their hands. Later that night, Holmes and I stood once more on the deck, the fog coiling around us like a living thing. The sounds of the ship were soft to hear, the creak of the vessel, the sigh of the sea. It was the breather Holmes insisted we take, a moment of quiet to let the facts settle. Well, there you have it, Holmes, I said, unable to keep the conviction from my voice. It must be her. Eleanor Vance. Abernathy's niece. She is tormenting him. She is the one who stopped the clock. It is a clear case of revenge. Holmes drew on his pipe, the embers glowing in the dark. He was silent for a long moment, watching the mist swallow the lamplight. It is a clear narrative, my dear Watson, he finally said, his voice a low rumble, and that is precisely what troubles me. It is altogether too clear, too perfect. The next morning the fog had thinned to a hazy silver veil over a calm grey sea. The placid surface of the ocean, however, did nothing to soothe my own convictions. Holmes, you must see it, I insisted as we finished a hasty breakfast in our cabin. Miss Vance is practically confessing. She has the motive, the opportunity to torment him, and a righteous fury that could drive anyone to extremes. We must have the captain question her. Holmes, however, was meticulously cleaning the stem of his pipe with a long wire, his focus absolute. You are looking at the players, Watson? I am for the moment more interested in the stage props. We are going to the cargo hold. An hour later, we were descending a steep metal staircase into the belly of the great ship. The opulence of the upper decks vanished, replaced by a world of stark functionality. The air grew cool and smelled of paint, tar, and the cold, dead weight of thousands of tons of luggage. A stout, officious purser, clutching a manifest, led us through a labyrinth of stacked crates and trunks, our footsteps echoing in the vast cavernous space. The only light came from a few caged electric bulbs and a heavy oil lantern the purser carried, which threw our shadows long and distorted against the stacks. "Here we are, Mr. Holmes," the purser announced, his voice booming slightly. Crates from the Harrington expedition. All sealed and accounted for. Holmes paid little attention to the large, stenciled boxes. Instead, he scanned the surrounding area, his eyes darting into every shadow. It was I who spotted it first. Tucked behind a loose coil of rope, lying partially in shadow, was a handsome, leather-bound book. It looked like a journal, its cover scuffed as if from a fall. "Holmes, look," I said, pointing. I picked it up. The leather was damp from the humid air, but the gilt lettering on the cover was still legible. A. Abernathy. My heart hammered in my chest. With trembling fingers, I opened it to the last entry. The handwriting was hurried, agitated, and the date was from the day before his death. "A furious argument with H," it read. "He is consumed by greed. He sees the idol not as a key to history, but as his key to a fortune. He believes I will stand in his way, that I will report his methods to the Institute. He told me, his eyes wild, that he would not be stopped. He said some heights are too dangerous to climb alone. I feel a terrible sense of foreboding. He is watching me now, even as I write this." "My God," I breathed, handing the journal to Holmes. "This is it, the motive. Harrington killed him in the Andes. Miss Vance must have found this diary, and now she is exacting her revenge." Quote. I expected a look of triumph from Holmes, a spark of discovery. Instead, he held the journal with a curious lack of emotion, turning it over and running a thumb along the edge of the pages. The lantern light caught the faint sheen of the paper. "Remarkable," he murmured, almost to himself. "The ink is dark and bold, with no sign of fading. And the book itself, it smells not of the dry dust of the Peruvian mountains, but of the damp sea air of the Atlantic, almost as if it has been waiting here for us to find it." We returned to our cabin, the forged diary resting on the small table between us. I confess I was utterly bewildered by Holmes's lack of urgency. To my eyes, the case was rapidly solidifying around Miss Vance. Yet Holmes treated the damning journal as little more than a literary curiosity. "Holmes, I do not understand your hesitation," I said, my frustration mounting. "The diary may be a recent discovery, but the sentiment is real. It is a voice from the grave." Quote. "Is it?" Holmes replied, turning from the porthole. He picked up the diary, not opening it, but balancing it in his palm. "Or is it merely a well-rehearsed line, delivered on cue? Let us reconsider this entire affair, Watson, not as a mystery, but as a stage play." He began to pace, the confines of the small cabin seeming to shrink around his restless energy. Act 1. A terrified lord begs for our help. He presents a threat, a stopped clock, and a convenient distraction, a cursed idol. Act 2. The villain appears. A vengeful young woman, Miss Vance, performs her role with public precision, ensuring everyone sees her animosity. Act 3. The crucial evidence is discovered. A diary, perfectly preserved, that neatly explains the motive for both the original accident and the subsequent revenge plot. He stopped and looked at me, his grey eyes sharp and piercing. "Every piece fits. Every character plays their part. It is a flawless narrative, and that, Watson, is its single greatest flaw. Reality is never so tidy." He tapped the diary. "This is not evidence. It is a script. The ink is too fresh, the paper too clean. Miss Vance's performance was for the benefit of the ship's gossips. The stopped clock was a simple, theatrical device. We have been viewing this from the wrong perspective." I stared at him, my mind struggling to keep pace. "What are you saying, Holmes?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice, and delivered the line that turned the entire case upon its head. "I am saying, my dear Watson, that there is no plot to murder Lord Harrington." The statement hung in the air, utterly preposterous. "No plot? But the fear, the clock." "All of it," Holmes cut in, "is a meticulously crafted illusion. The true question is not who is trying to kill Lord Harrington. The question we must now ask is, why is Lord Harrington trying so desperately to convince us that someone is? He is not the intended victim of this plot. He is its author." I stared at Holmes. Momentarily, speechless. My mind, which had been so certain of the path before us, was now lost in a fog as thick as the one outside our porthole. Impossible, Holmes, I finally managed, shaking my head. I am a medical man. I know genuine terror when I see it. Lord Harrington is afraid for his life. No actor is that convincing. Is he? Holmes countered, his voice quiet but firm, an explorer who has faced down bandits in the Khyber Pass and stared into the maw of nature's worst furies. Such a man is a master of controlling his own perception, and by extension, the perception of others. His fear is the most crucial part of his performance. He picked up the forged diary from the table, holding it by a single corner as if it were contaminated. And what of his leading lady? If Harrington is the playwright, then Miss Vance is his star actress. Her public disdain, his visible shock. It was a scene for our benefit, Watson. A perfectly rehearsed drama to cement her as the villain and him as the victim. I felt a surge of indignation, both at the deception and at my own gullibility. Then we must confront him, expose this charade for what it is, quote, and have him simply end the play before the final act. Holmes replied, a thin smile on his lips. No, we have been hired to play a part, and we shall play it to perfection. We will be his diligent protectors. We will shadow his every move, offer our counsel, and all the while, we will watch. We will watch the author for a sign, a slip of the tongue, a glance towards the true prize. The word hung in the air. Prize? What prize? Holmes moved to his trunk and retrieved a passenger manifest and a map of the ship's layout he had acquired from the purser. He spread them across the table, the papers rustling in the quiet cabin. The distant, mournful call of the ship's foghorn echoed across the water. A man like Harrington does not orchestrate such an elaborate and risky deception for mere amusement, he said, tapping the manifest with his finger. He is diverting our attention, and the attention of everyone on this ship, away from something. Something of immense value, insurance, a hidden fortune, a priceless object he means to steal, using his own murder as a distraction. We are no longer preventing a crime, Watson. His eyes gleamed with a fire I knew so well, the thrill of a truly worthy puzzle. We are now waiting for one to be committed. Our new role as shadow protectors began the following day. We followed Lord Harrington at a discreet distance, watching him take a brisk walk on the deck, engage in polite conversation with fellow aristocrats, and generally act the part of a man trying to escape his own dark cloud. It was a masterful performance. He never once looked over his shoulder for us, yet we felt his awareness of our presence like a physical touch. In the late afternoon we found our opportunity. Harrington left Miss Vance, seated alone in the ship's magnificent library, a grand, two-story room, panelled in dark cherry wood. The air smelled of aged paper and beeswax, and the silence was deep and respectful, broken only by the soft rustle of turning pages. Green-shaded lamps cast pools of warm, focused light onto the reading tables, leaving the spaces between in deep shadow. Miss Vance was seated in one of these pools of light, a book open in her lap. With her severe black dress and somber expression, she was the very picture of tragic, noble grief. The time has come to gently shake the web, Watson, Holmes murmured, and see how the spider reacts. We approached her table. She looked up as Holmes's shadow fell over her book, her eyes cool and guarded. Mr. Holmes, she acknowledged, her voice a perfect blend of surprise and politeness. Miss Vance, he replied, giving a slight bow. I hope we are not disturbing your reading. I merely wish to express my admiration for your composure last night. To confront the man you hold responsible for your uncle's death in so public a forum, it required a strength I find remarkable. He let the compliment hang in the air. Her expression did not change, but I saw her knuckles whiten where she gripped her book. Grief is a powerful fuel, sir. I find it gives me strength I did not know I possessed. Indeed, Holmes pressed, his voice like silk. A performance of great passion, and now, with the discovery of your uncle's diary, you have the perfect justification for that passion. A voice from the grave, crying out for justice. It is a powerful narrative. For the briefest of moments, a flicker of something raw and unscripted flashed in her eyes. It was not anger, it was fear. The mask had slipped. She recovered instantly, rising to her feet, with a fluid grace that was, in itself, an act of defiance. I am not a narrative, Mr. Holmes. I am a woman who has lost her only family to a greedy, ruthless man. And that diary, as you call it, is not a tool. It is the truth. She looked from him to me, her gaze cold and dismissive. Now, if you will excuse me, I suddenly find the atmosphere in here rather crowded. She turned and walked away, her back ramrod straight, disappearing into the shadowed aisles between the towering bookshelves. Her words were flawless, I whispered, once she was out of earshot, but her eyes were not. Holmes replied, a flicker of satisfaction in his own. The web, Watson, has been shaken, and the spider is afraid. The consequences of shaking the web came sooner than I had expected. That evening, as a string quartet played softly in a nearby salon, a steward brought an urgent hand-written summons. Lord Harrington requested our presence immediately. The handwriting was jagged with what looked like panic. The author grows impatient with his actors, Holmes remarked dryly, folding the note. He feels the need to write us a new scene. When we arrived at the suite, the scene was one of calculated chaos. A decanter of brandy lay shattered on the fine Persian rug, its contents staining the intricate pattern like a pool of dark blood. Lord Harrington himself was slumped in an armchair, his head in his hands, feigning utter despair. The ugly Incan idol seemed to watch from its pedestal, a silent, stone witness to the manufactured drama. He was here, Harrington choked out, looking up at us with wide, terrified eyes, or someone was, at the door. What happened? Holmes asked, his voice calm and steady, the perfect anchor in his client's staged storm. Harrington scrambled to his feet and pointed a trembling finger at a piece of white paper lying just inside the threshold, slipped under the door. I heard a whisper of it, a rustle, then nothing. I watched as Holmes knelt down, carefully extracting a handkerchief to pick up the note. He read it aloud, his voice devoid of emotion. The mountain still waits. Justice comes at 4:50. He held the note for a moment, his expression grave. I must admit, despite knowing it was likely a fraud, the starkness of the message sent a shiver through me. To an unknowing observer, it was a death sentence. Holmes played his part beautifully, turning to Harrington with a look of deep concern. You are certain the door was locked, my lord? Bolted. I have not left it unbolted since you first came. Quote. Later, in the privacy of our own cabin, Holmes laid the threatening note on the table beside the check Lord Harrington had given him as a retainer. A desperate move, Watson, he said, producing a small magnifying glass from his pocket, and a remarkably clumsy one. He gestured for me to look. The paper is from the ship's own public writing lounge. Convenient. But look here. He pointed the glass at the lettering on the note, then at the elegant sweeping signature on the check. The writer has disguised his hand, using block capitals. But the pressure is the same. See how the T is crossed with a heavy downward stroke both here. And the spacing, the almost imperceptible tilt of the letters to the right? Our terrified client is the author of his own death threats. He put the glass down, a grim satisfaction on his face. Our conversation with Miss Vance clearly unsettled them. They feared we were straying from the script, so Harrington has forced this crude piece of evidence upon us to pull us back into line. That night I found I could not sleep. I sat at the small writing desk in our cabin, my journal open but the page blank, listening to the rhythmic groan and sigh of the ship's timbers. It was the sound of a living thing, and it felt as though we were trapped in the belly of some great beast, waiting for it to digest us. Holmes sat in his armchair, wreathed in shadow, the smoke from his pipe rising in a thin, lazy spiral. The energy he'd had earlier was gone, replaced by a deep, unnerving stillness. What if we are wrong, Holmes? I asked into the darkness, giving voice to the fear that had been gnawing at me, Harrington's clumsiness, the girl's fear. What if it is all genuine? What if our game of cat and mouse is simply giving a real killer the time he needs to set his trap? For a long while, Holmes did not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy, lacking its usual confident timbre. It was a rare moment of vulnerability, a glimpse behind the curtain of his formidable intellect. It has been a most engaging puzzle, Watson, he said quietly, a performance on a floating stage. But your question is a valid one. We are not dealing with chess pieces. These are human beings, driven by desperation, A miscalculation on my part could have irreversible consequences. I confess, the thought does not sit easily with me. He fell silent again. The admission, so rare for him, hung in the air. He then rose suddenly, the pensive mood broken, replaced by a renewed, focused intensity. He strode to the table and unfurled the ship's deck plan under the single stark light of our reading lamp. "We have been so focused on what he might steal from the ship," he said, his finger tracing the intricate lines of the diagram, "a jewel, an artifact, a fortune. We have failed to consider the most valuable prize of all." He looked at me, his eyes alight with the fire of final comprehension. "He isn't planning to steal something, Watson. He is planning to steal himself. He doesn't want to commit a murder, he wants to stage one." The pieces fell into place in my mind with a stunning, sickening clarity. "He means to disappear," I whispered precisely. Holmes confirmed, tapping the map. "He will vanish from the ship in the dead of night." A cry for help, a splash, a door left swinging open. "He will be presumed dead, lost to the Atlantic." The world will be left with an enduring romantic mystery. The explorer claimed by his own cursed idol, or perhaps by the vengeful spirit of his fallen rival. Miss Vance will play the part of the suspected but uncatchable killer, and Lord Harrington, free from his name, his debts and his past, will simply walk away to a new life. His finger came to rest on a small, isolated section of the lower aft deck, and this is where he will do it. The one spot on the ship, not fully illuminated by the main lights, with a low railing, and easy access to the service ladders. The perfect stage for a final act. There was no more time for talk. The puzzle was solved, the final picture revealed in all its stunning audacity. Now all that remained was to prevent the curtain from falling on this tragic farce. "He will likely make his move after midnight," Holmes stated, already pulling on his heavy tweed coat. "When the decks are empty and the night is at its darkest, we will be there to greet him." We made our way through the sleeping vessel, our soft-soled shoes making no sound on the plush carpets of the silent corridors. We descended into the ship's more functional levels, eventually emerging through a heavy steel door onto the lower aft deck. The change in atmosphere was immediate and profound. The warmth and luxury of the ship were gone, replaced by the raw, cold bite of the Atlantic wind. This part of the ship was not meant for passengers. It was a stark landscape of machinery, winches, massive coils of rope, and lifeboats shrouded in canvas like sleeping beasts. The fog remained our constant companion, swirling around the deck lights and creating a disorienting, ghostly gloom. The only sounds were the ceaseless churn of the ocean below, and the low, powerful thrum of the engines vibrating through the steel plates beneath our feet. "Behind that winch, Watson," I suggested, pointing to a large piece of machinery that offered deep shadows. "The wind is at our backs. Our scent will not carry, and it gives us a clear view of the railing." Holmes nodded his approval, a rare deference to my practical military sense, and we settled in for our vigil. The wait was agonizing. Every creak of the ship, every distant clang from the engine room, set my nerves on edge. We sat in silence, two motionless shadows in a world of grey mist and black water, waiting for the play's final scene to begin. Just as the ship's bell chimed 2 in the morning, we heard them. Soft, deliberate footsteps. Two figures emerged from the gloom, moving with a purpose that belied the late hour. It was Lord Harrington, and, as Holmes had predicted, Miss Eleanor Vance. The transformation in Harrington was shocking. Gone was the frail, terrified old man from the suite. This man stood straight and tall, his face set with a grim, resolute determination. He handed Miss Vance a heavy leather satchel, which she accepted without a word. Her payment. He then removed his thick wool overcoat, folded it neatly, and laid it on the deck near the railing. He loosened his tie. He was setting the stage for a man who had perhaps fought for his life before being pushed overboard. He walked to the railing and gripped it, staring down into the churning, inky blackness of the sea. Miss Vance stood back, a silent observer, her role in the drama nearly complete. Harrington placed one foot on the lowest rung of the railing, preparing to haul himself up for his final, disappearing act. The wind whipped at Harrington's hair as he balanced on the railing, a man poised between two worlds, the one he knew and the watery abyss he sought. He tensed his muscles, gathering himself for the final plunge into the cold, dark anonymity of the sea. It was at that precise moment that a calm, clear voice cut through the howl of the wind. "I would strongly advise against that, Lord Harrington. The Atlantic is notoriously unforgiving, and the landing would be permanent." Holmes stepped out from the deep shadow of the winch, his figure seeming to materialize from the fog itself. I moved with him, positioning myself a few feet away, ready to intervene should our client make a last, desperate bid for freedom. Lord Harrington froze, his body locked in a state of shock, one foot on the railing, the other on the deck. Miss Vance let out a small, sharp gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. The color drained from Harrington's face, leaving it a waxy, corpse-like yellow under the dim deck lights. He scrambled down from the railing, trying desperately to salvage his shattered performance. "Holmes!" he cried, his voice a pathetic imitation of relief. "Thank God! He was here. A man in shadows. He tried to push me." Quote, "Please, my lord," Holmes said, his voice quiet but utterly commanding. He took a step forward, and then another. "The performance is over. There is no man in the shadows. There is no curse. There is only a desperate nobleman, a talented young actress, and a rather elaborate scheme to defraud the world." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle the stopped clock. The conveniently discovered diary, so miraculously preserved, the public confrontations, designed to create a suspect, the clumsily forged note, and now, this final act. A very thorough production. My only criticism is that you vastly underestimated your audience. Harrington stared, his mouth opening and closing silently. All the strength, all the resolve he had shown just moments before, had evaporated. He was once again the frail, frightened man from the suite, but this time, the fear was entirely genuine. It was the fear of being caught. Miss Vance did not feign innocence. She simply stood rigid, her face a mask of cold, defiant fury, her part in the play now truly over. Harrington finally crumbled, slumping against the wet railing, his body shaking not from the cold, but from the utter destruction of his careful plans. He looked less like a lord, and more like a ruined gambler, whose final desperate bet had failed. Holmes stepped closer still, his tone shifting from accusation to a kind of detached academic curiosity. He looked at the broken man before him, a specimen whose motives were the last piece of the puzzle. "The planning was audacious, I grant you that, but the why of it all remains the most interesting question," Holmes said softly. "Tell me, my lord, what is it that you are running from that is so terrible, you would rather erase yourself from the world than face it?" Lord Harrington let out a long, shuddering breath, a sound that was half sob, half surrender. The fight was gone, leaving only a hollowed-out man, drenched in the cold sea spray and the wreckage of his own life. He slid down the railing to sit on the damp, cold steel of the deck, a lord no more. "Running," he whispered, his voice raspy and thin against the wind. "Yes, Mr. Holmes. I have been running for 2 years. Running from a ghost, but not the one you think." He began to speak, the words tumbling out in a torrent of long-suppressed truth. The story he told was not one of simple greed, but of a friendship poisoned by obsession. In the Andes, Abernathy had become consumed by the idol, not for its monetary value, but for the fame he believed it would bring him. On that final day, on a narrow pass overlooking a chasm, Abernathy had tried to take it by force. "He came at me," Harrington confessed, his eyes wide with the memory. "He was a man possessed. We struggled, right on the edge. I only meant to push him back. But he was off balance. He stumbled, Mr. Holmes. He simply fell. It was an accident, born from self-defense. But who would have believed me? I was the only witness. His partner, his rival, alone with him on a mountain. In a moment of pure panic, he had made the fateful decision to cover it up, arranging the scene to look like a simple, tragic fall. But he was not the only person who knew Abernathy was obsessed. "Miss Vance," I breathed, understanding dawning. "She was not just his niece," Harrington confirmed with a bitter, broken laugh. "She was his partner in everything. She had letters from him, detailing his plans to acquire the idol, no matter the cost. She came to me a month after I returned to England, not with grief, but with a ledger. She has been bleeding me dry ever since, threatening to expose me as his killer." The elaborate charade on the Olympian was his final, desperate gambit. His fortune was gone, and Miss Vance's demands were increasing. He could not pay her, and he could not escape her. So he devised a plan to die. He offered her a final, substantial payment, the satchel of cash she now clutched, in exchange for her help in staging his murder. She would be the prime suspect in a death that never happened, free to disappear with her money, while he would vanish, finally free from the ghost of Abernathy and the blackmail of his accomplice. Holmes listened to the entire confession without interruption, his face impassive. When Harrington fell silent, there was only the sound of the ocean. He then turned his gaze to Miss Vance, who stood pale and defiant. "The authorities in New York will be very interested in this story of blackmail," he said, his voice neutral. Then, he looked back at the pathetic figure of Lord Harrington. He seemed to weigh the scales of justice in his mind, not as the law would see them, but as he did. "However," he continued slowly, "the law is a blunt instrument for a case with so many sad human edges. Perhaps there is another way." He took a step towards Miss Vance. "When this ship docks, you will take your money and you will disappear. You will never contact anyone from your old life again. If you do, I will personally see that your story is told to Scotland Yard." He then faced Harrington. "As for you, my lord, the world will believe you were lost at sea tonight, a victim of your own cursed legend. In a way, you will be. You must leave this ship as a common passenger, with a new name and what little you can carry. Your title, your lands, your name, they are all at the bottom of the Atlantic. You sought to become a ghost. I shall grant your wish." And so, the bargain was struck on the dark, wet deck of the SS Olympian. Back in our cabin, as the first hint of dawn painted the grey horizon, I looked at Holmes. "Is that justice?" Then I asked to allow the lie to become the truth. He looked out the porthole, watching the waves. "We saved a man from a foolish end, Watson. We punished a blackmailer, and we freed a man trapped by a single moment of fear. The law would demand a hanging. I believe a life of quiet exile is a more fitting and perhaps more poetic sentence. Lord Harrington will be haunted not by a curse but by his own name, a name he can never use again." He was right. The world would get a thrilling mystery, a legend to be told for 100 years. They would never know the truth of the sad, desperate man who authored it. But we knew. And sometimes, I suppose, that is enough. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to subscribe. More chilling cases, more brilliant deductions, only on the Detective Files.